Everyone thought this judge would punish him, but what he did shocked the courtroom. The elderly man stood alone in the courtroom, small in frame, but heavy with worry. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not from age alone, but from the weight of everything he had been carrying for far too long. In his trembling hands was a single piece of paper. A parking ticket. Something most people would barely think twice about. But for him, it had become a mountain. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't trying to fight the system. He was simply tired. Tired in the way that comes from years of pushing through life without much help. Tired from waking up every day, knowing that no matter how careful you are, one unexpected expense can shake your entire world. His eyes told a story before he ever spoke. A story of long nights, quiet struggles, and a constant effort just to stay afloat. Money had been tight for a long time. Fixed income. Rising costs. Groceries more expensive than they used to be. Prescriptions that couldn't be skipped. Heating bills that didn't care about age or circumstance. Every dollar had a job, and there was never enough to go around. The fine he was facing might not have looked serious on paper, but to him, it felt overwhelming. It felt unfair not because the rule was wrong, but because life had already taken so much. He didn't come to court expecting sympathy. He didn't expect special treatment. In fact, he probably expected the opposite. He expected to be told that rules are rules. That mistakes have consequences. That compassion has limits. That's what experience had taught him. As he stood there, the courtroom slowly filled with silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, not empty. People stopped shuffling their papers. Conversations faded. Even the air seemed to pause. There was something about his presence that commanded attention without effort. Not because he demanded it, but because everyone could sense the quiet weight of his situation. This wasn't a man trying to get away with something. This wasn't someone looking for excuses. This was someone who had reached the end of his strength. He had followed the rules his entire life. Paid his taxes. Worked when he could. Stayed out of trouble. And now, standing in a courtroom over something so small, it felt like the world was reminding him how fragile stability really is. One moment of bad luck. One missed sign, one simple mistake, and suddenly you're standing in front of a judge, hoping to be understood. His hands tightened around the paper as he waited, not because he was nervous about speaking, but because he didn't know if his words would matter. He didn't know if anyone would hear the story behind the ticket, the story behind the tired eyes and slow steps, the story behind a life that had never been easy but had always been honest. The courtroom itself was formal and structured. Wooden benches, flags, seals, a place built on order and authority. It was a reminder that the law doesn't bend easily, that decisions made here have real consequences. And for someone like him, those consequences felt intimidating. As the seconds passed, all eyes slowly turned toward the bench, toward Judge Frank Caprio, a man known by many, but in that moment, simply the person who would decide what happened next. The judge hadn't spoken yet. He hadn't raised his voice or looked down from the bench with judgment. He was listening, observing, taking in more than just the facts on paper. The tension wasn't loud. It was quiet and controlled, but it was powerful. Everyone in the room could feel it. The unspoken question hung in the air. Would this moment end in punishment, or would it end in understanding? The elderly man waited, not for mercy, not for miracles, just for a chance to be treated like a human being. Just for a moment where someone in authority would see more than a violation code and a dollar amount. Someone who would recognize that sometimes life itself is already the harshest penalty. And as the silence stretched on, it became clear that this wasn't just about a parking ticket anymore. It was about how justice responds to vulnerability, about whether the system has room for compassion, about whether doing the right thing always means enforcing the rule, or sometimes means understanding the person standing in front of you. The room remained still. The moment remained unresolved. And everyone waited to hear what Judge Frank Caprio would say next. Judge Frank Caprio paused. It wasn't a long pause, but it felt meaningful. The kind of pause that tells you something important is about to happen. He didn't rush. He didn't interrupt. He didn't look annoyed or impatient. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his expression calm, thoughtful, and steady. It was clear he wasn't just looking at a case file anymore. He was looking at a person. The courtroom remained silent. No one moved. No one spoke. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. Judge Caprio had seen thousands of cases. Tickets, fines, violations, excuses, arguments. He knew the law inside and out. He knew what the statute allowed and what it demanded. But he also understood something that isn't written in any rule book. He understood that justice is not just a system. It's a responsibility. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and measured. There was no anger in it. No authority meant to intimidate. Just clarity. The law gives me discretion, he said. And today I choose compassion. The words were simple, but their impact was immediate. They landed gently, yet powerfully, like a truth everyone needed to hear. The elderly man looked up, unsure if he had heard correctly. For a brief second, confusion crossed his face. Not because the words were unclear, but because kindness is often unexpected in places built on strict rules. Judge Caprio continued, explaining that the purpose of the law is not to crush people under its weight, but to guide society fairly. He acknowledged the violation, but he also acknowledged the circumstances. He recognized that sometimes enforcing the rule to the fullest extent doesn't serve justice. Sometimes it only adds to a burden that is already too heavy. With that, the fine was dismissed. No dramatic announcement. No applause. Just a quiet decision that changed everything for the man standing before him. It wasn't that the rules had failed. The rules had done exactly what they were designed to do. They gave the judge discretion. They allowed space for judgment, for context, for humanity. And in that moment, kindness mattered more than punishment. The elderly man stood there, still trying to process what had just happened. His shoulders slowly relaxed. The tension that had been holding him upright seemed to fade. His grip on the paper loosened. It was as if a weight he had been carrying for weeks, maybe months, had finally been lifted. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile widely or raise his hands in relief. Instead, his reaction was quiet and deeply human. Gratitude filled his eyes. The kind of gratitude that doesn't need words. The kind that comes from being seen. The courtroom remained quiet, but the silence had changed. It was no longer tense. It was reflective. Everyone present understood that they had just witnessed something rare. Not because a fine was dismissed, but because compassion had taken center stage in a place often associated with punishment. Judge Caprio looked back down at his bench, ready to move on to the next case. To him, this wasn't a performance. It wasn't about making a statement. It was simply about doing what he believed was right. About remembering that behind every citation is a human story. That day, the courtroom learned something powerful. Justice isn't always about punishment. It isn't always about enforcing the maximum penalty. It isn't always about proving authority. Sometimes justice is about mercy. It's about recognizing that life can be unfair even without fines and tickets. That some people are already paying a price far greater than any court could impose. And that real justice doesn't lose its strength when it shows compassion. It gains it. For the elderly man, that moment meant more than avoiding a fine. It restored a sense of dignity. It reminded him that the system could still be fair. That someone in power was willing to listen. That his struggles mattered. For everyone watching, it served as a reminder that empathy has a place even in the most formal spaces. That authority doesn't disappear when kindness is shown. And that mercy, when used wisely, can leave a deeper impact than punishment ever could. As the case ended and the next name was called, the moment quietly passed. But its lesson stayed behind, lingering in the minds of those who witnessed it, carrying forward a simple truth that's easy to forget in a world obsessed with rules. Justice works best when it remembers humanity. And sometimes the most powerful decision a judge can make is not to punish, but to understand.